Joe Biden has come up with a new plan to end racism in America. He wants to ban airlines from charging people for more legroom, saying that it disproportionately affects people of color. Of course, I'm not kidding.
Some airlines, if you want 6 more inches between you and the seat in front, you pay more money.
Yeah.
But you don't know it until
you choose that option when you're buying your tickets. Of course not.
Purchase your ticket. Look, folks, these are junk fees. They're unfair, and they hit marginalized Americans the hardest, especially low-income folks and people of color.
According to this line of logic, that means that football and basketball games and every sporting event is also racist for charging people different prices for better seats. And this week, Ralph Macchio has responded to new criticism that Karate Kid, which came out in 1984, almost 40 years ago, was too white of a movie. By the way, this should be a parody article from the Babylon Bee or The Onion if they actually still did do satire and comedy, but this is from People magazine. It's a real story. If you got a problem with Karate Kid being too white, then you can always watch The Last Dragon, which came out about the same time, which I actually thought was fantastic. Who's the master? I am. You are the last dragon. You possess the power of the glow. Ba-dum. Of course, no white people complained that that movie was too black and needed more diversity, or that the only white person in the entire film was the evil record executive. But then Hollywood did what Hollywood always does with every popular film franchise that just so happens to star a white character. They remade it and then race swapped him out for a black one, this time with Jaden Smith, Will Smith's son, playing the lead role, and also Jackie Chan, which is odd because Jackie Chan is Chinese and actually taught the kid Kung Fu, which is a Chinese tradition, because karate is a Japanese tradition, and you may recall that Mr. Miyagi was from Japan. They still called it the Karate Kid, though. Should have called it the Kung Fu Kid. Should have been a totally different movie, but they just decided to race swap it like they always do and got woke and ruined it. But if you swap out a black character for a white one, then they get really upset and they call that whitewashing. And then I guess you get your Twitter account banned as well, because after they released a screenshot of the new Black Ariel and the new live action Little Mermaid film, somebody decided to take that and swap it out for a white actress with red hair, just like the original cartoon. And then they got their Twitter account banned, and they were labeled a racist. And you may have heard that the NHL just released their long-awaited diversity report because they're concerned that there are too many white people who play hockey, but the madness never ends. There are also too many white girls who like to dance in ballet class, so ballet has a diversity problem, according to the Seattle Times. And here's what some people in Seattle and elsewhere are doing to change that. Also, apparently there were too many white people who helped the Allies win World War II, and so the University of Rhode Island decided to remove a World War II mural because there were too many white people in them.
Now at 5:30, a mural at the University of Rhode Island that's been on display for nearly 70 years is being removed. It comes after students complained about a lack of diversity depicted in that picture.
For 7 decades, thousands of students have passed by the murals. Staff says recently for some, it's been a problem.
I have received complaints about the murals. Predominantly the persons painted and depicted on the wall are predominantly white, and that does not represent who our institution is today.
Sherman's family says
Joe Biden's student loan forgiveness program is also considered to be racist because it forgave the same amount of money for all students, no matter what their race was. And Black Lives Matter says that the black students should have been given more money. Also, a new study has linked the chemicals in hair straighteners to an increase in uterine cancer, which is also, you guessed it, being blamed on white people because, as you know, a lot of black women like to straighten their hair. And so that's our fault. MSNBC says that a new study exposes not the chemicals that are causing this cancer, allegedly, but the new study exposes the dangerous consequences of white beauty standards. It's our fault that black women like to straighten their hair. So maybe it's time that white people start calling out people like Beyonce for her cultural appropriation. Our culture is not your costume, Beyonce. Also, if you haven't heard, the president of the American Historical Association, which is dedicated to preserving America's historical records and correcting falsehoods, apologized for doing just that after they corrected some of the falsehoods that the Black Lives Matter movement was spreading, particularly through the 1619 Project, which was a propaganda campaign started by the New York Times, which really tries to, I guess, credit black people for, building the United States, because the first slave supposedly was brought here from Africa in 1619. Of course, after they were sold to European traders by fellow black people on the continent of Africa. So he published this pathetic and groveling apology for doing his job and correctly pointing out the false history that they're promoting. He sincerely regrets being accurate, and he is deeply sorry for that. He says he apologizes for the damage, and he is hoping to redeem himself. But speaking of slaves in America, Michael Moore learned that one of his ancestors was a Scottish slave here in the United States. Of course, a white person, a Scottish person, a Scot, who was then later killed by Native Americans. And actor Don Cheadle was quite saddened to learn when he appeared on the PBS documentary series Finding Your Roots that his ancestors were not just slaves here in the United States, but that they were owned by a Native American tribe. He didn't know that Native American tribes, and most Americans don't know, that the Indians did own slaves. And making it even more sad was the fact that his ancestors were still enslaved after the Civil War, when white people freed the slaves, but the Native American tribes, of course, didn't abide by those rules, and so they still kept their slaves. I might have to revisit and expand on this for a Thanksgiving special report, since around that time every year, as you know, the liberal media industrial complex complains about what the white people did to the Native Americans, so we'll have to remind them what the Native Americans did to black people. Things are getting so strange in the United States that black Marxists, like those over at MSNBC, even say that white people shouldn't be allowed to have an opinion about what happened at the Oscars when Chris Rock was slapped by Will Smith.
I'll try to put this in context for, our white fellow countrymen as best I can. And really, truly, Black America, there is a commonality amongst us all. And if we went to a white person's home and it was their family dinner and we were sitting there at the table and the mother hauled off and slapped the father, and everybody at that table has an opinion. The sister's like, Mom, you always do this. And the brother's like, I can't believe you guys are doing this. And Dad is like, you're terrible. If I weigh in as the guest in this home and I say, yeah, you guys are terrible, everybody's like, I'm sorry, when did you get an opinion? This is our family table. That's what this moment felt like for many of us. And there's a nuance to what happened that we should get into. I thought the slap itself was completely uncalled for. And I want to be really clear while we're talking about family talk. I think it is utterly ridiculous to center this conversation in the opinions of white folks. This is just about what happened there. The jumping off point should not be, oh, but what might the white people think about it? It's just this moment between those two men. I thought it was uncalled for. So I'm curious your thoughts, Michael.
And if you thought that the anti-whiteism couldn't get any worse than what's spewed out of MSNBC on a daily basis, over at PBS, they actually blamed white people for what Will Smith did.
And Professor Yulin, I want to jump right in with you. You wrote a searing piece for The Hollywood Reporter in which you seem to dissect each action Will Smith took that night in a deeper context of pain, specifically what you called black pain. Why do you think it's important to see this moment through that lens?
I think that anytime we witness violence, we need to understand that from a place where we recognize the emotional and psychological state that's driving this physical response to a trigger. And Will Smith was definitely triggered that night. But I think in the broader context of American society, we need to understand what was happening there is really rooted and steeped in a 400-year commitment to Black erasure, Black marginalization, Black silencing, and the stereotyping of Black people.
It's white people's fault. Also, telling Black Lives Matter mobs not to riot when they are rioting is considered to be racist, according to this persistent professor over at Boston University.
If we're going to talk about George Floyd and really understand it, then we need to understand community reactions to it. And we often hear politicians, we hear civic leaders from inside Black communities and from outside of them as well. We hear President Biden say, I understand your frustrations, but don't destroy property. Well, when you say that to Black people who historically have been property, one of our greatest weapons against injustice was the looting of ourselves as property from the system of slavery.
Actually, white people freed the slaves, and hundreds of thousands of white people died in the Civil War in order to do it. You're welcome.
And what we see in communities is they're reacting to the very racism of what we call property, right? So that's why I think it's very important for, people who see reactions in communities.
No, they're actually reacting to fake news, of course, but don't want to get sued for $250 million by the Floyd family for pointing out what really happened. The family of St. Floyd said that they're preparing a $250 million lawsuit against Kanye West because he pointed out what really happened. If you happen to utter facts or opinions that may hurt other people's feelings, then maybe give them a heads up by ordering my shirt from markdice.com or click the link in the description below. Warning, contains facts and opinions some may find offensive. Or if that's not your style, order an Arrest Dr. Fauci shirt, an F. Joe Biden shirt, or any of my awesome designs, all available in a t-shirt, long sleeve, and a hoodie, and a whole bunch of different colors as well. So head on over to markdice.com or click the link in the description below and check them out.